podcast for those who suffer, which is everyone.
It's a space where we can speak honestly about what it feels like to be in desolate places without losing hope.
Welcome to In the Thicket.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
Nicole.
Welcome to In the Thicket.
Yes. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I was outside and it was like just, I don't know, what was it, 4 or 5 degrees out and sunny. And it was just like the first day where I felt like, oh my gosh, like spring is coming. It's true. But like, I don't know, did you guys, some of you were in Ottawa, like we have a special guest with us today. We have Taylor Hyatt. Am I saying your name right?
Yes, you are.
Hyatt, great. Okay. And we're very, very excited to have Taylor on. And she's going to introduce herself in a little bit. But so Taylor is in Ottawa, as is Erin. So did you guys get warm weather this week? Or not so much?
Yes. Yeah, we got kind of warm weather. I'm just changing my name because I realized I forgot. It always comes up with my legal first name, which is Alyssa. And so I changed it to Erin just so that nobody's confused if they're watching on YouTube.
If you're
exactly.
If you're listening, that doesn't matter at all. But if you're watching on YouTube,
that's right. Exactly. Yeah. Like it was nice. I find it's like the like it's like whiplash with the weather at this time of year, you know, because right now it's cold. Like it is cold outside today, and we've had a few really cold days, you know. But then I looked at the weather next week. There's going to be one day that's like 9 degrees, 10 degrees.
I know.
Which is so funny. Yeah.
What do you guys think is the sign of like spring? Like what is it about like what happens in spring that makes you have that feeling of like, spring is coming? Like I can remember when I was living in Winnipeg and it's just so cold, right? And you forget that you can't, like everything that has a smell is frozen when it's just cold. And so it's when you start to smell things again outside, like you smell mud or you smell whatever it is, that's for me. I'm like, okay, it's warming up, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
This is a good question.
I think, you know what? I think for me, it's just the days getting longer. Like when I have more daylight, then I'm like, and there's a marked difference between like January daylight and March daylight. I mean, even though it's rainy and stuff still in March or it snows still or whatever, it's a bit brighter. Like it's so gray in January, it's so gray. So I think daylight for me is the start. But then we're in spring when like you smell the grass and the fresh stuff and that's definitely.
When we were growing up, especially because when I was living in the prairies or whatever, it's like it's a little bit more straightforward with the seasons there, you know, like once winter ends, it's like done, and then it, you know, but it was spring. Like it was really spring when it got to be 15 degrees, and that was the degrees that it had to be before I was allowed to wear shorts.
Right.
So like, which is kind of funny because when you think about it in the spring, it's like it gets to be 15 degrees and you're like, it is so warm.
Yeah.
Goes into the fall, you're like, it's freezing.
I'm gonna wear all my sweaters and my scarves. Well, for our American listeners, 15 degrees Celsius is a lot warmer than it is in Fahrenheit. So just
that's true.
We're not that crazy, you know.
That's true.
And also I was just thinking again, we are so markedly Canadian. Use the word markedly twice. There you go. That's impressive. But we're so Canadian because we all like the weather is such an important part of our podcast. It's like we're a podcast about suffering
and weather. That's right. We've said that before too, you know. We just make that like a consistent thing. Like today is sunny and 14 degrees. How about you, Taylor? When do you know that it's like starting to be spring out?
I always, growing up, I used to think of the buds on the trees, but maybe now I'm waiting a bit too long. I like the suggestion of daylight. I'm making dinner at 4:30 and it's no longer quite pitch black.
Right.
Which is really lovely.
So true.
Also, can we just say, speaking of being in March, that that's what everyone's talking about now with my friends. Like it's been a year. COVID stuff, like, or I mean, lockdown, I guess, or like in stay home and not see people, social distance, yada yada.
I've heard people being like, you know, happy 370th day of March 2020. You know,
Oh, that's so good and true.
Yeah, that's right. I know it's a very weird anniversary.
Totally.
Yeah. Like an anniversary. Yeah. But it's actually, I was able, because stuff is open here. So I was able to go and have some food with a couple of friends the other day.
Nice.
And it was very weird and legit. I had to actually process it a little bit when I came home, because I was like, I feel like the police are gonna come and get me. And it's like totally legal to do, but I just felt so strange being in the presence of people that, and it was like a weird feeling. I'm like, this is odd. I think it's gonna take us a lot to get used to being just like
totally
out and about,
Yeah, I had that a few weeks ago. A friend who moved near me invited me out for a walk and was like, is somebody going to come after us because we don't live together? What's going on?
That's right. Yeah,
exactly.
There's also a lot of comedy about like over dramatizing our kind of, I definitely understand. I'm not trying to say our suffering is like minimizing my suffering on this podcast about suffering,
right? Yeah,
but I just find it really funny. There's like I think Jen Fuller has a great Instagram like clip where she's dressed up as a grandmother, and her kids are like her pretend grandkids or great grandkids, and she's like, y'all don't even know how hard it is. Like in my time, we had to binge watch all of these awful shows on Netflix for 3 months because we couldn't go outside, like things like that,
Right.
I saw that one.
It was so good. It's so good.
Yeah, it's good, man.
That's good. Well, yeah, I'm glad that spring is coming. I mean, I like winter, but it's kind of nice that it sort of feels like a little bit more hope too, of just like okay, all this, the really long winter of 2020, maybe we're coming out of it,
Yeah, true.
That's good. So, okay, without further ado, Taylor, we want to hear from you. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about yourself. And you're somebody who has a disability, and wondering if you can share with us about what is it like growing up with you have cerebral palsy, and just about your experience.
I'm not sure where to start. I would say above all, growing up in a small town with a disability means people don't quite know what to do with you. You stand out. And a lot of the stores and the places you could go in the area I grew up weren't built to be accessible. So that always means having a family member or a friend tag along as my shadow. And in school, I was quite the overachiever. If my body couldn't match up with what my classmates were capable of, then I had to stand out in some other way. So I was the brainiac. And I would say at times growing up with a disability has given me a chip on my shoulder and a bit of a complex, because finding out where you fit socially and what your talents and gifts are is complicated. And one of my rules growing up that I've had to learn to shed, especially since moving here, is you don't go where you're not wanted, and it's pretty easy to see where that is, where you are not supposed to be. So how do you carve out the places where you are meant to be? And because you have family or friends or whoever shadowing you in inaccessible environments, how do you make sure that you're not just the recipient of other people's kindness, and is that kindness meant well? How do you show that you can contribute and you can give? Those are things that I still wrestle with, I think.
Yeah. Maybe in case there are some listeners who aren't sure exactly what cerebral palsy is, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, it's brain damage that paralyzes one or more of your limbs. Cerebral for the brain, palsy for paralysis. Mine is spastic diplegia, so I have spasticity in 2 of my limbs, my legs. I'm a walker and wheelchair user. I also have weakness in my right hand. I'm southpaw. Oh, yay, another one! Yeah, most people don't really know the gory details, though. They just know that this is whatever mobility device I happen to be using on a given day, and we work around that. Oh, story for my birthday a couple of years ago. A couple friends invited me out to a concert at a local pub. Imagine doing that in 2021.
I know, right?
But the venue was inaccessible, and my friend was helping me walk down the stairs. And I must have stumbled or been shaky. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, it's just my CP legs doing their thing." And this drunk dude walks by and goes, "You have sleepy legs?"
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, that's great. Sleepy legs.
That is hilarious.
That's awesome. That kind of sounds like my dad when he doesn't wear his hearing aids, and then he hears very funny things.
That's so good. Well, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Taylor, but from I remember talking to another friend of mine who also has CP, that it's it's something that usually affects your muscles in your body, right? But you're thinking, like you're saying, like you're the brainiac and like your thinking is intact. But that I remember this friend saying that it was very frustrating that people would see some sort of physical difference and automatically assume that there's some sort of cognitive difference, and just automatically you get treated differently. So I don't know if
absolutely. I do want to be careful there, because there can be a bit of a hierarchy in the way that we look at disability. I am somehow further up on the food chain because my cognitive abilities aren't really affected, and I don't want to look down on anyone whose thinking may be. But you're absolutely right. People can't conceive of one without the other, and I've been lucky at times, and we'll get back to that later, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of true though, because even the reverse is finite, or is like something else that you see, right? Like if somebody is an autistic person, then they maybe appear very able-bodied, but then they may have other accessibility things that are necessary for them, right? And
right.
So then,
invisible conditions.
Yeah.
If you don't see it, it must not be a problem. Absolutely.
Yeah. Even I experience sometimes, because I have a like an accessibility thing for my car, so that I can park close to the store when I go in, because I have fibromyalgia. So sometimes I'll get out of the car and people will give me the dirtiest looks. And be like,
you're like, what does she need that for?
Yeah, totally. So sometimes there was even a couple of times where people were like really staring at us, like, "I have fibromyalgia, it's a pain condition," and they're like, "Oh yeah, I wasn't like, what." I try and say like gently, because like people don't, like, it's a learning, like people are learning,
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I think, Taylor, it's such a wonderful reminder too and this is part of our conversation, today we're talking about the value of each person, and our physical, our mental, all of these capacities and our differences don't play any value into the purpose and the meaning and the importance that each human is on this earth, and the part that we're all playing, right? And it's so easy to make judgments based on whatever characteristics someone may have. But on that, and we're kind of already talking about this, but what do you think are some of the attitudes that you've experienced towards you with respect to disability, and what has that been like?
I think one of the biggest ones is a desire to prove myself. if my body doesn't match up physically, then I have to stand out in some other way. I am having a complete brain fart, but we'll just go with it.
Oh, no worries.
All the time I have it. Yep.
Well, I can I just say something before you go on, Taylor?
No, go ahead.
I think that you said that before, like you kind of mentioned this like desire to prove yourself, and that really is resonating with me. Like I think that in some ways, for different reasons for different people, is a very universal. It can be a very universal experience, at least like wherever we feel, I don't know, different or even erroneously less than, like in different categories of our lives. That, I mean, as what you described earlier, like I've experienced that, and you described it exactly the way that I experienced it, like an inordinate need to prove myself and feeling less than other people with whom I make totally unfair comparisons because I can't be like them in so many ways. And I think all of us in some sense really suffer from a lack of being able to see ourselves, let's just say, the way that God sees us, and to see our value the way that God sees our value. And so we use metrics that we can't really even measure up to, because it's impossible in some sense, in our lives. And it's so unfair to us and other people. But anyways, I just want to say that just really, the way you described that experience in your life really resonated with me.
Yeah.
I'm glad it stood out.
Yeah.
And thanks, Rachel. You reminded me of something else I wanted to mention. There's kind of a bouncing between ping pong. There's the overachiever, or there's the you must be all set in life. You must get everything handed to you, or you have license to be lazy because of that. And I hope we'll get to this later, but social services don't operate as smoothly as people think they do. It's not just, you have a disability, here's your free wheelchair and accessible apartment and everything. You have to go through this complex application process and prove you're in need of things. And another thing that I wrestle with is, where's the line between proving you need things and having to tell sob stories to make sure they know you need things and are quote unquote deserving of them.
Yeah. In some sense, it really is kind of a depersonalized thing, like it's very institutional. Like that's even in my limited experience, like just with fibro stuff of trying to do things, is that, it feels like you're just kind of one number among like a bunch of people. And exactly like you say, like it's not really about you as a person, it's kind of about you as a product. But even like I'd be interested to hear even what your experience has been like too, in terms of kind of the systemic things, like the whole discussion about racism and gender and all of these kind of things has brought forward some topics of like systemic discrimination, or like how our society exists and whether it is open to people who have different experiences or different abilities or things like that. So I'm wondering too what your experience has been in that sense.
It's hard to say. I don't usually. It's kind of hard for my brain to make the leap between my experience and the entire system, but not everyone has to wait 7 years for an apartment that will meet their needs. Not everyone writes to businesses whose entrances don't fit their mobility devices. And I'm tempted to jump ahead into some of the legislative stuff.
Go for it.
Okay.
Totally
Let's
go
talk
for
about
it.
People often attribute the desire to die, as in Bill C-7, to suffering, and they associate, you have a disability, therefore you must be suffering. everyone wants to avoid suffering. That's a very natural and normal thing. But there are many different kinds of suffering, and each one has a need that must be met and its own solution. The wish to end it all or to harm oneself does not come out of nowhere. If the issue is physical pain, the person needs medical personnel to give better pain management. If you have an inaccessible home, then you need an accessible one. If you're exhausted getting around, a mobility device, personal assistance at home. If the issue is a mental health condition, what supports can they access? And as we get into the bill, if you feel stuck between pain, isolation, exhaustion, poverty, or death, that's not a true choice at all, and something is currently being unaddressed.
Yeah, totally. It's I that's really striking, even that you bring up poverty, because I don't think that a lot of people realize, I don't think a lot of people would kind of put that into the equation, but it really is true that if you don't have money to access other services, like if you have money, you can access palliative services, you can access a lot of things that other people may not be able to access, pain service, all those kind of things. And if you don't, then you're waiting in a system that has you waiting for extraordinary amounts of time that are adding to suffering and adding to the likelihood that, that despair or that fear, that pain that's there is going to lead to a desire to really to put an end to the pain, even if you don't desire to die.
Exactly. One example I love to bring up, because I love seeing people's jaws drop. If you are unable to work and you're on provincial disability supports, how much money in Ontario do you get per month? And that has to cover your rent, your food, your medications, your everything. Any guesses?
I have a little bit. I mean, it's been a while, but I actually worked at a legal clinic where I help people get on ODSP. So
I remember that.
A bit of
it. So Nicole and I will guess.
Yeah, I won't.
And then
okay,
we'll see. Okay.
Rachel knows already.
I'm gonna guess $1,100.
Yep, bang on.
Seriously, actually?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I feel like kind of a victor, but then also very sad at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know how to... Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and one thing I had mentioned in our prep work for this was we think about comparing that to rent, and under provincial support programs, what assets can you have? Owning your house or your car, the asset limit is $2,000 as well. So that doesn't get you too far.
Yeah. That's crazy.
I have possibly, this is just my personal opinion, so I just want to, that's a disclaimer or whatever. But I guess I have kind of an unpopular opinion maybe, where I think in my kind of view, because there's two things that we're talking about here, right? Like people's personal lives and what they're going through, and our structure as a society and how we can best support people in it. And I think it is very the society bit in terms of like government and programs, it's very, very complicated, and it's very difficult to be successful. I would say most governments in the world are always like, they're never really that successful at doing this well. And this is my personal opinion, but I think we sometimes misplace our confidence, or we attribute responsibility too much to programs and to things like this, where we have responsibilities for one another, and we have responsibilities to care for the people who we know who need us, and who to receive from them what they have to give us. There's like that interdependent reality. But so my kind of read on systemic stuff is I'm a little bit more skeptical of the sort of that dialogue that is currently going on than maybe your average person would be. But where I actually think systemic damage is happening is with the bill that, like, I don't think there could be a clearer example of systemic targeting of
Yeah.
vulnerable people than this bill that is currently being debated.
Yeah.
So that's
because in order to be eligible, you have to have a grievous and irremediable condition, including an illness, disease, or disability. This bill, and that's under the current legislation before the expansion. So this entire practice was made for disabled and chronically ill people.
And have characterized people in that as people who might need to die, like that, just the characterization of people's lives is insane.
And where disability rights activists are worried now is because of the difficulties people have in accessing the basics of life, adequate relationships, adequate employment, safe housing. When you cry for help with those things, people will go, of course you're in a bad place. You have a disability. Your problems are because of your condition. And since assisted suicide and euthanasia deny people the ability to signal distress and have that cry heard, once you there are very few ways to mess it up. You can be very sure that your death will happen, and so you have an unequal ensuring that the life-ending measure is successful rather than an equal application of suicide prevention measures.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like either your options are sort of like poverty and not being able to live a life that is, that's going to have so many issues in terms of, accessibility or just basic human needs because of the way the system is, that might kind of create health problems or hasten death, or you can just choose to die earlier. And so your options are death or death, basically.
Exactly.
So what kind of message are we sending to our disability community or people with mental health issues, or just so many people now who are on this list?
Even more frightening, I think, and you mentioned this, Taylor, is like if someone is seeking help in any of those other areas, I mean, they're going to be deterred from crying for help in those other areas because their cry for help might be perceived as a cry for, hey, well, why don't you just choose euthanasia, the easier way out? So, and the coercion that can happen there when someone starts out seeking help and could end up like, it sounds, what I'm saying sounds like Orwellian, or it sounds so, it sounds dystopian or something, but it's not very far-fetched at all. And I don't think people recognize, and that's kind of the tension that you're mentioning, Taylor, that people are going to have to live with, like, not just now the responsibility of, okay, I need help, and I'm going to have the courage and the humility and the strength and the resources to ask for it. But I have to now decide, like, who am I going to ask who isn't going to try to pressure me to stop seeking help and to seek an end to my life?
Yeah.
Right. And there have been studies that have come out, I'd be happy to point you to them later, where doctors view the quality of life of disabled people in their care as worse than the person themselves do. And we've already seen in London, Ontario, and in Newfoundland incidents where doctors have brought up euthanasia as an option to people who have not requested it or have come in seeking other interventions.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And maybe do you want to share with us, you had an experience kind of last year with pneumonia, not with being offered MAID, but do you want to share that with us?
Sure. So 3 years ago, January 2018, I got sick with what I thought was a bad flu. Went to a walk-in clinic and was sent home with the usual advice: have some rest, some Advil, some chicken soup. You'll be better in a few days. Contrary to what they told me, my condition got worse. I started coughing and was struggling to breathe, had no energy. I called the provincial telehealth line and was told, go to the ER. Called a few friends hoping to get a ride there, but nobody with a car was available. And my family's about 3 hours away. There's no way they could help either. So I took a cab to the hospital and was admitted right away. Couple hours of testing, they didn't seem to have any answers, but the doctor came to see me at about 11 o'clock that night. She said, the only thing we know is this infection is affecting your breathing. You may need oxygen. Is that something you'd want? And my answer was, of course I do. But something didn't register there. So she asked me again, are you sure? It was all I could do not to get up in her face, you know. Yeah. I was working in disability policy at the time, and it was like, do you know what I do for a living? I come across stories like this every day, and now I just happen to be on the receiving end. Breathing supports would be considered standard treatment for a non-disabled person in their mid-20s, as I was at the time. But there was clearly a bias or I was alone, tired, sick, disabled. It could have been easy for someone who doesn't know what that's like to just opt out of a life with what seems to them insurmountable difficulties. Both my age and the effects of my disability gave me an advantage here. I was able to advocate for myself, even though I didn't have support, and I was able to be taken seriously in a way that many others wouldn't. So it turned out to be pneumonia. Thankfully, I never needed the oxygen. I was given antibiotics and stayed in the hospital for a week, and here I am.
There you are.
Praise
yes.
God.
Praise
But
God. I know.
I'll tell you, if this bill passes, I am terrified to ever go to the hospital alone again.
Yeah.
Like just the amount of self-advocacy that has to be present in our healthcare system to navigate it, you know, and then if you add into that, like maybe visible differences between people, like you're talking about, you know, like somebody, if they were in their mid-20s and they didn't have cerebral palsy and they went into the thing and they were having trouble breathing, like it's standard. That's a standard treatment to give oxygen. Like there would not have even been a thought, you know, of like,
you wouldn't ask the question once, let alone twice. Like,
to just double check and make sure, you know, and it really is scary. Like it's very scary to think about that, because much of the disability community, may have good supports and to, you know, people to help advocate for them, or they may be excellent at self-advocacy, having, you know, kind of had to be, but then there may be a lot of people who are not, like that's not either their personality, or they don't have those kind of supports or whatever.
Well, it's even sorry. No, it's even making me think of you know, when you think about health is complicated, right? And our physical health and our emotional health, our mental health, everything gets connected. And you think about, okay, when you have some sort of maybe chronic illness or pain or something, and then there's you know, our mental health is affected by our circumstances. So mental, you know, depression, anxiety, severe mental health conditions are way more prevalent in people who have lower socioeconomic status and poverty and things like that. And so now if you throw into the mix, you know, at least sort of on one side before, we have this have had hopefully an attitude that, okay, no, life is worth living, there's always hope, you know, suicide is not an option, or it's not, you don't have to have that, it doesn't, you know, there's, you know, and telling that to people who are struggling and having good mental health supports, and this has, you know, there's been a lot of great advocacy in mental health in the last several years of just being like, it's okay to struggle and here are supports and things like that. But now we're getting the opposite message, where it's like, Well, actually, it's okay to end your life. In fact, that could be a good option. And how is that gonna affect somebody who's already feeling maybe depressed and they've got all these other circumstances, and now the government is telling them, yeah, actually your life might not be worth living, you know? Like, I'm sorry, but like, what side are we on here? Do we want to have good mental health care or not? Like, you can't have both.
Yeah, and it's painted as this exercise in autonomy when it's really not. I'm trying to think of a good way to put this, but in some conditions, your thought processes are changed, are skewed, and do we really just want to give up on people?
Yeah. I listened to a podcast, or not I don't know if it's a podcast, but it was like this YouTube video of this disability rights activist and his spouse, I think, and another two disability rights activists basically, and I guess maybe we'll call her an ally, a friend. And they were talking about the bill. This is before the Senate amendment, so it's the first version of the bill. And yeah, they mentioned exactly this. They were like, well, because some of the cases, the Quebec case, for instance, that brought this whole thing about has come from people who have certain conditions and illnesses where they feel that they want to exercise this choice for euthanasia, and they were not able to because they didn't meet all of the requirements, which I think eventually they did meet the requirements. So I could be wrong about that, but that was my understanding. But anyways, they were talking about these kinds of people on this YouTube video, and they were saying, well, okay, though there are people out there who have this desire to access euthanasia for various reasons. But it's different to respect those people and say, well, okay, we understand you're really suffering and it sucks maybe for you that this, and I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but it maybe really, empathetically, it's awful that you want this and you don't have access to it or whatever. But to then enshrine in law for a vast swath of people who don't identify with that, but who are put in danger then of something happening to them that they don't actually want, it doesn't make any sense. So it's like, to me, it's like, and I'm not even reading into whether these people's desires are affected by their conditions and mental health stuff to make it so that their choices aren't exactly what we would promote as healthy, right?
But exactly what this bill does is set aside part of the Canadian population and say, for this carved out group over here, death is an acceptable option.
I wonder, like, in terms of disability rights advocacy specifically, like, because I know that you've been very active in that, obviously, like you've talked about, working the politics around that and things like that. And what do you think, like, if you were talking to people about why this bill should not be expanded to, apply to, all people with disabilities and to remove safeguards and like all of these kind of things, what would be kind of the most compelling things that you've been able to share with people?
This is where my brain has been trying to go. Thanks. So there's four arguments that disability rights activists typically use, which is, and the first one is that it's unnecessary. Whether these procedures are legal or not, anyone is free to end their life. No matter what effects your disability has, there is a way for you to end your life unaided, even if only by refusing food and water. Suicide isn't supposed to be easy or pleasant, which is why government, public policy, pop culture all work to prevent it. And the role of government should be to end suffering where possible, not the people who suffer. And I should say that people also have the right to refuse unwanted medical treatment or to prevent unwanted treatment from starting. People have the right to palliative care, to relieve pain and other unpleasant symptoms associated with the dying process. But when you do that, withdrawal of medical treatment makes life or death dependent on the person's underlying condition, rather than taking a proactive measure to end the person's life. Assisted suicide is discriminatory. We've been over that. Society reacts differently to suicidal behavior depending on a person's disability status. The choice of assisted suicide is not being made freely. Palliative care shortages, poverty and disability, people with disabilities living in institutions and group homes rather than in their own homes with the supports they need. And the line we always take away here is that there can be no free choice to die if you don't have a free choice in where and how you live.
Yeah.
And the last one is that they say that safeguards will be put in place, but they don't always work. The reasonably foreseeable and advanced state of irreversible decline requirements. The reasonably foreseeable requirement in the original legislation was eliminated thanks to the Quebec court case, and there's nothing to prevent the gate from being opened wider. One common limit that people try to put in is the prognosis for someone to live. They can be diagnosed and have a year left, 6 months left, but those guesses aren't always right. And so you need to tread carefully there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks. It's helpful to hear those things in such a succinct way. And I'm like, okay, we got to get these quotes on our, on our social media and stuff, because I think that people can get lost in the through the jargon of all of this. But Taylor, the way that you've expressed this, it just makes it so clear, like, especially what you're saying, like, this is not we're saying it's all about autonomy and choice, but this is not a real choice, because if people don't actually have a actual option to live a life, a quality of life, because of lack of access of supports, and like that that's not where funding is going, well, then there's not a free choice to die, because you don't actually have a good other option, right? So and I think we
sorry.
Yeah, no, good.
Also, that point about suicide should not be why are we making suicide easy for people? Like, why is this something that, like, it's what Nicole kind of talked about before, about on the one hand we want suicide prevention, but on the other hand we're literally making it like, like a drive-through menu, like, here you go. Like, it's the easiest possible way.
Unfortunately, even the Canadian Association for Suicide Prevention tries to tell the difference between these two things. One is done impulsively and violently. The other one is planned and peaceful, and you can have your loved ones around. Just because the procedure is available doesn't mean that's how your end will be. You can't mandate someone's presence with you. You can't mandate complications away. That's another thing that really disturbs me in the current regulations and the way they collect their data. You have no way to know what goes on after the medication is given. Before the Senate, a doctor recently testified saying that given other contexts in which similar drugs have been used, people feel like they're drowning. People don't just slip away easily and painlessly. And we need to find out more about what's happening right now before we expand anything.
Even
the other
personal oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I just have so just like
I
oh
know.
my goodness. No, you go ahead, Erin. I mean I'll mention what I meant after.
I'm just thinking even about personal autonomy, and like absolute personal autonomy is not a thing.
Nope.
Like it's not a
Right.
thing, and it never has been, and it never should be an actual human value that we uphold,
Right.
regardless of whether you're religious or not, or you're, person of faith or not, or whatever. Like, because absolute personal autonomy is not upheld in any other law that we have. Like,
Well,
it is
it's
not upheld in murder
impossible.
laws. Like,
In a way,
like I
exactly.
feel like killing you, Rachel, because that is where my absolute personal autonomy go. Like that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So like, why would we say that? It's not like the death of a human being does not has no impact on everybody around them. It does. It impacts family. It impacts exactly like you say, Taylor, how we look at the disability community and whether a life is worth living or not. It has a whole impact on all of that. And absolute personal autonomy is not a thing.
No, I mean, even just look at the way our infrastructure goes. We can't live a day without hydro or heat in our house. We are dependent on other people to give us these things that we need to survive.
Yep.
And I think the rest of the world needs to really learn from the disability community about the value and the prominence of interdependence.
Totally.
Yes. Totally.
Okay, so on this note, I know we have to kind of wrap up soon and we'll go into our God winks, but I just want to ask Taylor and also, any of us to share. So, okay, so we've got this awful bill that is coming and already awful things happening, but we're talking about interdependence here. We're talking about what things should look like. So what are some practical ways, like, we're trying to advocate so that people talk to their MPs and sort of bring these issues up and say, hey, like this bill is not what's best for so many Canadians and all of what we're trying to say. But we won't, in the end, we don't know what's going to happen with that bill, but I think we can still change the culture here and promote a culture of more accessibility or interdependence or something. So I'm wondering what are some practical things that we can do, not only on a legal level, but just on a practical everyday level to build a different sense of things, to kind of contrast what's happening.
Unfortunately, the legal and political stuff is my wheelhouse. So I would say, above all, ask people what they need in terms of disability and assistance, because sorry, not in my tongue again. Don't be afraid to ask people what they need. Don't assume that a given need is being met or a program is out there. Educate yourself on major disability policies or shortcomings in your area. My former colleagues at Not Dead Yet are great for this. tvndy.ca. If you're looking for a petition against the bill, check out Dignity Denied and the work of Gabrielle Peters. But on an interpersonal level, meet people where they are, be open to them. Don't impose your ideas of what independence or what proper functioning should look like.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's helpful.
It is helpful. I think it's helpful to have that reminder of looking at even like what makes life worth living, because we experience that in different ways, like the things that I love that are part of my life, like, I don't know, going out for supper with friends, or like I love, driving, going for a long drive and have it, like those are things that bring me great amounts of joy, but are not the same, like regardless of, ability of bodies and things like that, those might not be the same things that bring Rachel joy. And the same thing, like for Taylor, like the things that bring you joy are going to be also different because of, you know, the circumstances of your life and the way your body operates. So it's like, it's also good for us just to realize that difference doesn't come down to ability.
Right. And difference doesn't mean less either.
Yeah. Yeah.
I held up my Raptor sweater when we were talking about things that bring us joy. It's like, see, not everybody loves them, but some of us do.
Inordinately.
Yeah, I also want to share like a couple examples of people that I went to school with. A friend of mine who was visually impaired, like I think almost totally blind, if not totally blind, and just the most hilarious person. But what I really loved about him is he would just ask for help, like of anywhere and anywhere. Like he would be in the middle of a street and just realize like, oh, I don't, because he knew when I was in London, actually, he knew London very well, but there are some places he didn't know, and he would literally just be like, hey, excuse me, I hear there's a person over there, like, can you tell me where, can you just like hold my hand and take me to the church that's over there? Like he literally did that all the time. I think that's how we met, actually. And he was like, I think I ended up going to seminary somewhere, but we've lost touch since then. But he was just like so chill about reaching out to other people, and it was such a cool, like, it was such a witness to everybody else to be like, oh yeah, why am I so hung up about connecting with other people? Because he was so free with that. And then another friend of mine, Trevor, who I don't actually even know what Trevor's, Father Trevor, because he became a priest.
Trevor Plug.
Yeah.
He's a good friend of mine as well. Taylor, you know.
Yeah, I got to know him through CCO, and it was, what is wrong with my tongue today? We hit it off quite easily because we were both discerning further service and commitment to the church. Both had linguistics degrees, and both had similar disabilities.
But yeah, he's such a cool, and like, you know, just his life was such a witness. I mean, he unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but anyone who knew him, and then three of us on this call did, you know, he was just such a cool person. So I also think that the value of witness, like we talk about that a lot, you know, suffering well, but also just seeing people, like you were saying, Taylor, like meeting people where they are, realizing how much of a difference people are making regardless of their struggles or their ability or whatever specific circumstances of their life might be, and in through those specific circumstances that they're so impactful on others, you know.
He would be somebody, actually, we could ask him to pray for us in this.
Ask
his intercession. Father Trevor Plug.
Oh, I love that.
One of the most joyful people, honestly, that I've ever met, Like,
totally. Yeah. I used to tease him about his arm because he had to lift himself up and out of that chair all the time. So he had like pretty big guts. I was like, dude, Trevor, you're like the strongest person. Like his upper body strength was pretty
It was impressive. Totally. Yeah.
Hey, I get that too. Imagine a arm wrestling match between the two of us.
Yeah, that's right.
I would 100% lose. I have weak guns.
So I have golfer's elbow. I can't even arm wrestle myself.
Excuses. Yeah.
I know.
Oh man. Well, thank you, Taylor. Thank you so much. I really feel I just think really privileged to have this conversation with you. And I know this is the first time we've met over Zoom here, and you've but just like, well, not for me anyways, I know you've known Aaron a long time and stuff, but just like, I just hope that the folks who are listening, that you can just take a moment and let this conversation sink in, and let the things that we've talked about just kind of take hold of your heart, and so that you can discern, what is God calling you to do in this area. So if you're in Canada, guys, this is a live issue. So we have a call to act now. And this is not, you know, I'm super busy right now. And it's really tempting to just feel like, well, I can't do anything. I don't have time for this. But like, if my own, you know, there's a scripture that talks about, you know, it's like the sower who's sowing the seed, right? And how there's the plants that grow, but then the weeds and the anxieties of the world choke them up, right? And it's like, let's not be that person. Let's not let our own kind of anxieties and our own life right now kind of choke us up into what's happening right now in our community, like in our Canadian community. And to our friends south of the border or listening in other parts of the world, like, please pray for us. We really need your support right now. This is such a an important issue, and that we're all called to discern, like, what am I called to do about this, whether it's legally or through prayer or through just getting more educated about how we can serve all of the members of our communities. So just encouraging you to really to take this seriously and to be hopeful too. Like there is such hope. God is always at work. We've said this before, we felt called to do this series for a reason, and so believe that God is moving in that. So there. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now. But okay, so we want to talk about our God winks. So what maybe we'll start with Rachel. Rachel, what's your God wink for this week?
Sure. So my God wink for this week is related to Cardinal Collins. He's just been a big, I don't know, he's just been around in my intellectual world for the last month, it feels like. But anyways, I was listening to a homily of his for weekday mass this week, and he talked about, he just put it so well, this veneer of civility. So he talks about like how we in North America in a special way have a sense in which civility masks evil, and we think we're all cool and good just because we look and feel proper and seem proper. And then he actually related that to MAID and what's going on right now. So it was just beautiful to hear him say that. But as we were having this conversation, I was just thinking, when we talk about dignity in dying, why is it that this sort of, in quotes, peaceful injection way to die is the way that we think of a dignified death? Like, if someone is in the midst of suffering and in the throes of pain, why does that lack dignity? Like, if they like, you know what I mean? And it just it just struck me that our podcast is about suffering. It's all about recognizing that Christ redeemed our suffering. There is dignity in the midst of suffering, and this civil veneer, it's a lie. It's a lie from the pit of hell that we have to be proper and I don't know, whatever, like
polished and
together all the time.
Or just nice.
Right. And it's just for me, like, in a way, when Cardinal Collins gave that homily, it just sort of like lifted the veil of that. And I was like, ew, like that's so scary and dark and gross that like polished properness is our benchmark of dignity.
Yes.
Ugh, no,
and needing help with basic bodily functions somehow takes away your dignity. It doesn't.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, good Rachel, good God wink. What about you, Erin?
So I have to get a book. I'm gonna walk away and I'm gonna talk to you while I'm walking away to get the book.
Okay.
Oh, I see the book.
We're gonna sit down and put these.
If you're watching the YouTube video, you might know.
Could you hear me that whole time?
Kind of.
Yeah, the microphone's pretty good. So this is my God wink. So Consecration to Saint Joseph, the book, which is really awesome. But in here, there's specifically a prayer, and I read it when we were doing the Divine Mercy that one time, Rachel. But it is the prayer of Saint Alphonsus Liguori for a happy death, and so I'll read it, and then you'll know why. Saint Joseph, by that assistance which Jesus and Mary gave you at death, I beg you to protect me in a special way at the hour of my death, so that dying, assisted by you, In the company of Jesus and Mary, I may go to thank you in heaven, and in your company sing God's praises for all eternity. Amen. Like when we talk about an assisted, we are always assisted in death. Like we are always assisted in death. And who is more powerful to assist us in death than the Blessed Mother and Saint Joseph? You know, obviously along they're bringing us into the arms of Jesus and the Father and the Holy Spirit, you know, like, but so that for me, I read that and I was like, of course, like, they assist us in death. We always know this. We pray this in every Hail Mary, you know, like, anyway, so that was just a big God wink for me of like, oh yeah, like we are not alone in death in that time of, you know, the deepest leap of faith that we will ever have to make into the arms of the Father. We are not alone in that by any means.
That's cool. That's really beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
Taylor, what about you? Do you have a God wink for this week?
I might have a bit of a strange one, but we'll go with it.
Awesome.
An orange.
Okay.
Tell us more.
Cool. My routine right now is to get up every day, get ready, make my coffee, and just plow through job applications for a couple hours. And I'm not in the greatest place right now. I'm just burned out from all of it. But I was interrupted by a knock at the door. All right, let's go see who it is. And it was a friend of mine in my building. She said, I saved you a treat. Have a wonderful day. She hands me this orange. And I don't know, it was a reminder to embrace the unexpected, or a reminder that I'm not alone in this hard season of life, that life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Life gives you oranges. They will go wonderfully with your lunch.
Nice.
Bits of sweetness can be found even in this messy season that I'm in.
I love that.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
I'm drinking orange juice in my what looks like a tea mug right now.
There
So that just feels very topical.
Again, this is like the Inception God wink. That's what we How about you, Nicole? What's your God wink?
Yeah, well, mine was, so last weekend I was talking to a friend of mine, a very dear friend, and she's just got a lot of stuff going on in her life, kind of on all fronts right now. And she was looking for a new place to move into, and had found one potential place, but was waiting to hear back from them. And she needed to give her month's notice like that day. So she needed to hear back like that day in order to make this work. And so she was kind of stressed about that. So we're just talking about that, you know, and we started talking about how it's just like, you know, God, often sometimes it's like, you know, we talk about the 11th hour is when God comes in, and God comes, it's like, we're like more like the 11:59 kind of, you know, and sometimes like 12:01, you know, it's like, and so we were just talking about that, and all of a sudden her phone buzzes and she looks down, and it was a text from these folks, and they were like, we're so excited to welcome you into our new place, da, da, da. So I was just so, I don't know, it was just such a beautiful moment to be with her as she got that message, and as we're talking about just this sort of abandonment and trust, and it's like, boom, that's when it came in, you know. That's
amazing.
So that's my God wink for this week.
That's beautiful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
God.
Sweet. So, and she's a podcast listener, so I don't know if she wants me to say her name, but shout out to you know who you are.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
All right.
Yay, we're so happy for you.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thank you
Taylor.
so much, Taylor.
Yeah.
It's so, I just want to say, like, it's just really inspiring to me to, like, we were speaking to you today. We've spoken with Dr. Dave D'Souza, just people who have been, and even Garnet, MP Garnet Dennis, like, who have been part of this fight for a really long time. And just the endurance, the perseverance, and the choice to continue to hope and you know, reach out to people in the hope that they will hear you and listen and maybe change their minds or do something. Like, it's just so inspiring. So thank you for you know, just being amazing
for that.
Absolutely. I think
Thanks so much for having me. It's a delight to be on a podcast that I listen to regularly. It's weird to be on the other side of that line.
Yeah, right.
I know, right? Even weirder when you listen to yourself on it. You're going to be like, what? I hate listening to myself on anything.
It's the worst.
I know. Like,
it's the worst.
What? I sound like that to everybody. I'm just kidding. No.
That was good.
Like that leads into our podcast on suffering and self-worth. It'll be coming out in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, that's right.
That's true. Yeah.
You give away who's doing that one?
It's actually just the three of us.
Yeah.
That one was just a three of us one.
We had enough. We had
enough material
between the three of us to talk about that one.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just a reminder to everybody that all of the resources are on our website. So there's a inthethicketpodcast.com. There's a section on euthanasia series, and it has, I already put the things up that Taylor had mentioned, the organizations that she was talking about there. So there's a link to contact your MP. There's a link to Garnet Genesis stuff. There's a whole other section on community support of ways that you can love the people around you and help kind of build up a culture of life in concert with the political action stuff. So don't forget to check that out.
That's right.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks,
all right.
guys,
Thanks,
for listening.
everyone.
See you next
See you
week.
next week.
Thanks,
God bless
everyone.
you.
Thanks, Taylor.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Thicket. If you like what you hear, give us a rating and hit that subscribe button.